The cold marble pressed against my knees like a living thing that knew my shame. Their laughter still echoed through the golden hall, mixing with the rustle of expensive silks and the clink of jewelry. I trembled, not just from fear, but from feeling too exposed, as if my skin had become a mirror reflecting everything I couldn't hide. The borrowed dress slipped from my shoulders, betraying that I didn't belong here. Then his voice cut through the mockery like a blade. "This woman belongs to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The cold marble floor pulsed beneath my knees, as if the stone itself had a heartbeat and knew the depths of my humiliation. Their laughter still rang in my ears, a cruel symphony mixed with the rustle of expensive gowns and the metallic clink of jewels. I trembled, not just from fear, but from the sensation of being too exposed, as if my very skin had transformed into a mirror reflecting every flaw, every reason why I didn't belong in this glittering world. The borrowed dress, slightly too large at the shoulders, betrayed me with every movement. The fabric slipped and shifted, announcing to everyone that these fine clothes were not mine, that I was an imposter in silk and pearls. I had been brought here as an uncomfortable reminder, the bastard daughter of the former royal advisor, a man who had served the crown faithfully but whose memory the nobility preferred to erase. I was raised in the castle's shadows, among kitchen maids and servants, listening to grand celebrations from afar. When the Queen Mother requested that I appear to pay my respects to our distinguished visitor, I hadn't understood that I was being thrown to the wolves. The great hall was bathed in golden light that hurt my eyes. I walked among ladies who whispered my name with the same tone reserved for discussing diseases. One of them, the Duchess in blue silk, lifted her chin and let escape a muffled laugh when my worn shoe slipped from my foot. It was then that her laughter became a collective chorus and the air seemed to shatter around me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run back to the kitchens, to the warm smell of bread and the comforting silence of servants who knew their place. But the doors were so far away and the weight of every gaze pressed down on me. Then I stumbled. The sound of fabric tearing cut through the laughter, and I fell to my knees before a throne that gleamed under the torchlight. His throne. They said the visiting Alpha King had come to seal alliances, not hearts. He was a man forged by war, shaped by iron and the solitude of long campaigns. I had seen him only once before. A tall figure wrapped in black with eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. His presence made the very air feel heavy, as if each breath had to be earned. When he rose from his throne, the murmur in the hall ceased completely. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall measured and deliberate, and the silence stretched like a thread about to snap. His dark cloak brushed against the marble as he stopped directly in front of me. I couldn't lift my face, until I heard his voice, deep, almost gentle but carrying absolute authority. Stand up. But I couldn't. My body refused to respond. There was something in my knees that held me there. Something between fear and modesty, between wanting and being unable. Then he bent slightly and his fingers touched my chin. His touch wasn't gentle, but neither was it cruel. It was inevitable. He forced me to meet his gaze. His eyes were an ancient grey like the sky before a storm. In them, I saw the recognition of something I couldn't even name myself. He didn't smile. He simply said, in a tone that cut through the hall like a blade, "This woman belongs to me." The words spread through the silence, thick and heavy among the shocked murmurs. I saw the ladies press their hands to their mouths, the nobles exchange looks of disbelief. I felt heat rise to my face, burning away the shame and transforming it into something new, something that felt like strength. I didn't understand why he had said those words. There was no reason for it. I was nothing more than a servant, a social mistake dressed in borrowed silk. But the way the king pronounced those words made the entire world bend around them. The hours that followed seemed like broken dreams now. I was led from the hall under the stares of noble ladies amid whispers that burned like fire. They said I had bewitched him, that he was merely showing pity, that this would all pass. But I felt within myself a confusion that couldn't be explained in words. His touch still burned beneath my chin. There was something in the way his gaze had held mine, as if I had spoken a secret that disturbed him without ever uttering a sound. I was escorted by silent guards to chambers I had never seen before, rooms meant for guests of honor, not bastard daughters of forgotten advisors. As I sat on the edge of an ornate bed that felt foreign beneath me, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The Alpha King's eyes had seen something in me that I didn't even know existed. His declaration had been spontaneous, unplanned. I was certain of that. Outside my new chambers, I could hear whispered conversations. My name was on every tongue, spoken with wonder, fear, and resentment. The bastard daughter who had somehow caught the attention of the most powerful ruler to visit our kingdom in decades. But as I touched my chin where his fingers had been, I knew that whatever had begun in that moment would change everything. The king's words had been more than a declaration. They had been a claiming, a promise, a threat all wrapped into one. The night stretched before me, filled with uncertainty and the echo of that profound moment when the most powerful man in the room had seen something in a fallen girl that even she didn't know was there. In the days that followed, the castle became a silent arena of tension. The servants avoided my path, their eyes filled with awe and pity. The noble ladies whispered behind their fans with renewed vigor. And the king? The king remained distant, yet his absence felt like a form of presence. I could sense it in the air that circulated between the stone columns. I found myself thinking constantly about my father, the man whose blood had given me life but whose name had become a burden. Sir Edmund Blackwood had been the kingdom's most trusted advisor until he fell from grace, not through crime or betrayal, but through loving the wrong woman. My mother had been a merchant's daughter, beautiful but beneath his station, and their love affair had been the scandal of the court 20 years ago. I was the living reminder of that scandal, born 6 months after my mother's mysterious death. What I did know was that my father had fought to have me acknowledged, to give me his name and protection. He had failed. The Queen Mother had refused to legitimize what she called the fruit of weakness and poor judgment. So I had grown up in the shadows, cared for by kitchen maids who remembered my mother's kindness, fed and clothed but never truly accepted. My father had watched me from afar, unable to openly claim me but ensuring I received an education fit for nobility, all in secret, all in preparation for a future that seemed increasingly impossible. On the third day after the king's declaration, I was summoned to the library. The vast room smelled of aged leather and candle wax. He stood with his back to me, gazing out through tall windows at the rain. When he heard me enter, he didn't turn immediately. Instead, he spoke into the silence. When you knelt before me, you asked for nothing. But everyone asks for something. What did you want? The honest answer formed in my throat before I could stop it. I only wanted to exist. The words hung in the air between us, more revealing than I had intended. He turned then, and something in his expression told me that my confession had affected him more deeply than any plea for mercy or wealth ever could. He approached slowly. When he stopped close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from his body, I caught his scent, leather and steel, pine forests and something indefinably masculine that made my pulse quicken. Then exist, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, even if the world cannot bear to watch. The intensity of his gaze was almost overwhelming. I felt exposed, as if he could see through all my carefully constructed defenses to the frightened, lonely girl beneath. Why? I found the courage to ask. Why did you claim me? For a long moment he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the words cost him something. Because I saw myself in you, the part of me that has always been alone, even surrounded by armies and advisors. You were the only real thing in that room full of gilded pretense. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. Before I could respond, a sharp knock interrupted us. "Enter," he commanded, his tone shifting instantly back to royal authority. The Queen Mother swept into the library, her cold eyes moving from the king to me and back again, clearly displeased. "Your Majesty," she said with a curtsy that managed to convey respect while radiating disapproval. I trust you are finding our library satisfactory. Quite satisfactory, he replied smoothly. Lady Lydia was just sharing some fascinating insights. Lady Lydia. He had called me Lady Lydia, using the title my father had dreamed of for me, but never been able to secure. The Queen Mother's lips tightened almost, imperceptibly. How illuminating. Though I fear there may be some confusion about our dear Lydia's station. She is, of course, grateful for your Majesty's interest, but she is not actually. She is exactly what I say she is, the King interrupted, his voice carrying steel that made the Queen Mother step back. I trust that will not be a problem. The silence that followed was fraught with unspoken challenges. Finally, the Queen Mother inclined her head with brittle grace. Of course, Your Majesty, as you wish. When she left, the King turned back to me with determination, mixed with the first hint of battles yet to come. That, he said quietly, was just the beginning. By claiming me, by elevating me with a word and defending that elevation with royal authority, he had set forces in motion that neither of us could fully control. But as I looked into his storm-grey eyes, I felt something I had never experienced before. The terrifying, exhilarating sensation of being truly seen, truly chosen, truly protected by someone with the power to make it matter. The game had begun, and I was no longer just a pawn. I was a piece that could change the entire outcome if I was brave enough to play. The transformation was swift and disorienting. Within hours, servants appeared to move my belongings to a guest chamber in the noble wing. The room was more luxurious than anything I had ever imagined. Silk hangings in deep burgundy, a four-poster bed carved with intricate roses, windows overlooking the castle's private gardens. But luxury came with a price. Every step I took now drew stares and whispers. The servants who had once treated me with casual indifference now showed confused deference and resentment. The nobles who had barely acknowledged my existence now tracked my movements with hawk-like intensity. Lady Catherine Mortimer, the Duke's daughter and undisputed queen of the castle's social hierarchy, made her displeasure known on my second day in the noble wing. She appeared at my chamber door with two companions, all three dressed in morning gowns that cost more than most families saw in a year. How fascinating, Lady Catherine said, sweeping into my room without invitation. Her voice was honey-sweet, but her blue eyes were chips of ice. Little Lydia Blackwood, suddenly elevated so far above her natural station. Tell me, dear, what particular skills did you employ to catch our visiting king's attention? The implication hit like a physical blow. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. I employed no skills at all, Lady Catherine. I merely existed in his presence as I have existed in this castle all my life. She laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. How delightfully naive. Men like King Aldrich don't notice serving girls unless those girls offer something very specific in return. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Are you questioning my judgment, Lady Catherine? We all turned to find the king standing in my doorway, his presence filling the space with almost physical force. He was dressed in leather hunting attire that emphasized the broad span of his shoulders, but there was nothing casual about his expression. Lady Catherine's face went pale, then flushed deep red. She dropped into a curtsy that bordered on panic. Your Majesty! You were merely leaving, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The three young women fled like sparrows before a storm, leaving me alone with the man whose attention had upended my world. He closed the door and turned to study me with those penetrating grey eyes. They will not be the last, he said simply. Are you prepared for that? The honest answer was no, but I lifted my chin and met his gaze. I have lived my entire life as the object of whispers and sideways glances, Your Majesty. This is merely a different type of the same treatment. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Call me Aldrich, he said. When we are alone, I would prefer to hear my name from your lips rather than titles. The request was so unexpected, so intimate, that it stole my breath. Kings were not called by their given names by anyone except perhaps their immediate family. Aldrich, I repeated softly, testing the feel of his name on my tongue. It felt like holding fire, dangerous and beautiful and impossible to contain. He stepped closer, and when he reached out to touch my face, his calloused fingers were gentle against my cheek. "You have been alone for a long time," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I whispered. "Haven't you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, too personal for someone of my station to ask a king. But instead of anger, I saw something raw flicker across his features. "Longer than I care to remember," he admitted. "Power has a way of building walls between a man and everyone else. People see the crown, not the person wearing it." "I don't see a crown when I look at you," I said. "I see someone who carries weight that no one else understands." The silence that followed was profound and intimate. We stood there, two people who had spent their lives on the outside looking in, recognizing in each other a reflection of their own isolation. Reality intruded in the form of another knock. Sir Marcus, the king's personal guard, entered after I granted him entry. "Your Majesty," Sir Marcus said, "the Queen Mother requests your presence in the throne room. There are matters of state that require your attention." Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell Her Majesty I will attend her shortly." When Sir Marcus left, Aldrich turned back to me with an expression that was part apology, part warning. "The Queen Mother is not a woman who accepts challenges to her authority lightly. By elevating you, I have threatened that control." "Then perhaps you should reconsider," I said. Though the words felt like glass in my throat, his hand shot out to grasp my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The intensity in his eyes made my pulse stutter. "Don't you dare suggest that I abandon you. I have made my choice, and I do not make choices lightly." The declaration sent heat spiraling through my chest. I had never had anyone fight for me before. "Why?" I asked again. "Why me?" This time his answer came without hesitation. "Because when I look at you, I see possibility instead of calculation, truth instead of manipulation. You don't want anything from me except the right to exist, and you don't even expect that. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Before I could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to my forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to my eyes. When he pulled back, his expression had returned to royal composure, but something fundamental had shifted between us. "Be careful," he said as he moved toward the door. "The Queen Mother's displeasure can take many forms." As he left, I sank into the chair by my window and tried to process everything that had happened. In days, I had gone from invisible servant to the focus of a powerful king's attention. I had gained luxury and protection, but I had also gained enemies whose resources for causing harm far exceeded anything I could defend against. But when I touched my forehead, where his lips had been, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it, rather than give up this feeling of being chosen, of mattering to someone who could move mountains with a word. The Queen Mother's retribution came swiftly through social isolation, so complete it felt like drowning. Within a week, I found myself completely excluded from castle life. Invitations stopped arriving. Conversations halted when I entered a room. Even servants began treating me with wary distance. I might have retreated entirely if not for an unexpected ally who appeared on a grey morning when the isolation had become unbearable. "Lady Lydia?" The voice belonged to a young woman with warm brown eyes and auburn hair. "I'm Lady Eleanor Fitzroy. I wondered if you might join me for tea this afternoon." I stared in shock. Lady Eleanor was one of the Queen Mother's own nieces, a young woman whose social position was absolutely unassailable. I stammered. "That's very kind, but I'm not sure it would be wise for you to be seen with me." Her laugh was genuine and bright. "My dear girl, I've been causing scandals since I was old enough to walk. One more won't hurt my reputation." That afternoon, sharing tea in her sitting room, I learned that Lady Eleanor was far more complex than her cheerful exterior suggested. She had been married at 16 to a much older lord who had died within 2 years, leaving her a wealthy widow with unusual independence. "The thing about being a young widow," she explained, "is that people don't quite know what to do with you. It gives one freedom to choose one's own friends, even when those friends might be considered inappropriate." She fixed me with a direct stare that reminded me of Aldrich's penetrating gaze, especially then. "I've watched you, Lydia. You have more grace and dignity than most of these so-called ladies possess in their entire bodies. You call it remarkable. Others might call it stubborn pride. Sometimes they're the same thing. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Besides, I have my own reasons for wanting to see the Queen. Mother's stranglehold on this court loosened. I was beginning to understand that Lady Eleanor was proposing an alliance. Our conversation was interrupted by commotion in the courtyard below. Through the windows, we could see young noblemen engaged in sword practice. Among them, unmistakable even at distance, was Aldrich. He moved with fluid grace that spoke of years of training and countless battles. Even in practice, there was something predatory about the way he fought. Economical, precise, deadly. "He's quite magnificent, isn't he?" Eleanor said, following my gaze. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." Her tone was gently teasing. "Just as you don't notice the way he watches you when you're not looking." "Eleanor, it's quite romantic, actually. The powerful king and the overlooked bastard daughter, like something from the old ballads." "This isn't a ballad," I said sharply. "This is real life with real consequences. All the more reason to be brave about it." She squeezed my hand. "He chose you, Lydia, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is?" Before I could respond, a knock announced a visitor. Eleanor's maid entered with a curtsy. "His Majesty King Aldrich requests the honor of Lady Lydia's presence in the gardens." My heart jumped into my throat. I found Aldrich in the rose garden, still wearing his practice clothes, his dark hair damp with sweat. When he heard my footsteps, he turned, and the smile that crossed his face was both welcoming and possessive. "You look well," he said, his eyes taking in my appearance with intensity that made me self-conscious. "Lady Eleanor's friendship suits you. You know about that. I know about everything that concerns you." The statement should have been alarming, but something in his tone made it sound like protection. "I'm glad you found an ally. You'll need friends in the days ahead." "Why? What's happening?" He moved closer, close enough that I could see the small scar through his left eyebrow, close enough to smell the masculine scent beneath leather and steel. "The Queen Mother has requested a formal audience tomorrow morning. She intends to challenge my right to elevate your status." Fear closed around my throat. Can she do that? She can try. Royal prerogative is complex, and there are ancient laws about bloodlines and legitimacy that could be used against your elevation. Then perhaps... No. His hand came up to cut my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Whatever arguments she makes, my answer will remain the same. You are mine to protect, mine to elevate, mine to claim. That is not negotiable." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my body. I had never belonged to anyone before, never been claimed or protected or fought for. What if protecting me costs you politically? His other hand came up to frame my face, holding me captive with his gaze. Then that's a price I'm willing to pay. I have spent my entire life making decisions based on political calculation. For once, I want to choose with my heart instead of my head. The admission was raw and honest, exposing a vulnerability few people ever saw. Without thinking, I reached up to cover his hands with mine. "Aldrich," I whispered, his name a prayer on my lips. "Say it again," he commanded softly. "Aldrich." And then he was kissing me, his mouth covering mine with hunger that spoke of loneliness and desire and desperate need. I had never been kissed before, but my body seemed to know exactly how to respond, my lips parting under his, my hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "remember this moment. Remember that you are wanted. You are chosen. You are mine." As he walked away, leaving me shaking by the fountain, I touched my lips and tasted forever on them. Tomorrow might bring challenges that could destroy everything, but tonight, I had been kissed by a king who claimed me as his own. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely, magnificently alive. The throne room had never felt so imposing as it did the morning of the Queen Mother's formal audience. Massive stone columns stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, while tall windows cast pale sunlight across polished marble. The Iron Throne itself seemed to loom larger than usual, a metallic reminder of power struggles that had shaped this kingdom for centuries. I stood in an alcove near the great doors, dressed in the finest gown I possessed, deep green silk that Eleanor had given me. My hands trembled slightly as I clasped them, trying to project calm I didn't feel. The Queen Mother entered with theatrical processional. She was accompanied by 3 senior advisors, 2 court historians, and Lord Chancellor Whitmore, a thin, severe man whose loyalty to her was absolute. Her gown was magnificent, deep purple velvet embroidered with gold, every inch the costume of a woman who had ruled from behind the throne for 3 decades. Aldrich sat upon the Iron Throne with casual authority, but I could see tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the armrests. He wore full royal regalia, transforming him from the man who had kissed me into a figure of absolute power. "Your Majesty," the Queen Mother began, her voice carrying clearly, "I come before you not as a challenge to your authority, but as a loyal servant concerned for ancient traditions that have served our kingdoms well. Speak your concerns." "Your Majesty," Aldrich replied, his tone perfectly neutral, "it regards your recent interest in the bastard daughter of Sir Edmund Blackwood." The way she pronounced bastard made it sound like a curse. "While your compassion is commendable, there are laws and customs that govern elevation of status within noble society." Lord Chancellor Whitmore stepped forward, unfurling a scroll. "Your Majesty, according to the laws of blood and station, no person of illegitimate birth may be elevated to noble rank without formal recognition by 3 separate royal houses and approval by the Church." I felt blood drain from my face. 3 royal houses. That meant foreign kingdoms would need approval. It was nearly impossible, clearly designed to prevent exactly what Aldrich was attempting. "Furthermore," the Queen Mother continued smoothly, "there is the matter of blood purity. The Blackwood line, while once distinguished, was tainted by Sir Edmund's association with merchant class. To elevate his bastard daughter would set dangerous precedent." Murmurs rippled through assembled courtiers. I could feel their eyes measuring, judging, finding me wanting. Aldrich's voice when he spoke was deadly quiet. "Are you questioning my right to determine who serves in my court and in what capacity?" "Not at all, Your Majesty, but there is a distinction between service and elevation. You may certainly employ anyone you choose, but to declare her Lady Lydia, to house her in the noble wing—" The Queen Mother spread her hands in helpless concern. "Such actions have consequences that extend far beyond personal preference." "What consequences?" Lord Chancellor Whitmore cleared his throat nervously. "The noble families are unsettled, Your Majesty. There are concerns about precedent. If bastards can be raised on royal whim, what value does legitimate birth retain?" I saw the trap now. They weren't just attacking my elevation, they were positioning it as a threat to the entire social order. By defending me, Aldrich risked alienating the very nobles whose support he needed. "And there are other considerations," the Queen Mother added delicately. "Rumours, Your Majesty, whispers about the nature of your interest in the girl. Such talk can damage reputations and create diplomatic complications." The implication hung like poison. They were suggesting Aldrich's protection was motivated by lust rather than honor, reducing our connection to something sordid. I watched Aldrich's face, looking for any sign their arguments were finding purchase. His expression remained impassive, but I could see the muscle in his jaw ticking. "I see," he said finally. "And what solution do you propose?" The Queen Mother's smile was razor-sharp. "Return the girl to her proper station. She may continue to serve in the kitchens, of course, but this dangerous elevation must end before it creates irreparable damage." The silence that followed was profound. Every person held their breath, waiting to see whether the Alpha King would bow to pressure or stand by his declaration. When Aldrich rose from the throne, the sound of his footsteps echoed like thunder. He descended slowly, each movement calculated and predatory. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "Your concerns are noted, Your Majesty, and rejected. The words hit like a physical blow. I saw Lord Chancellor Whitmore's face go pale. Several courtiers exchanged shocked glances. Lady Lydia's elevation stands, Aldrich continued. If the noble families find her presence unsettling, they are welcome to examine their own consciences to determine why worthiness rising above station threatens them so deeply. He turned to look directly at me, and the heat in his gaze was unmistakable. As for rumours about my motivations, let me clarify them beyond doubt. He strode across the marble until he stood before me, then took my hand. Lady Lydia Blackwood, I claim you not just as my ward, but as my chosen companion. If any person has concerns about that claim, they may address them to me personally. The throne room erupted in whispers and gasps. The Queen Mother's composed expression cracked, revealing fury beneath. But before she could respond, Aldrich continued. Furthermore, I hereby announce my intention to formally request Lady Lydia's hand in marriage. The negotiations will begin immediately. The words hit me like lightning. Marriage. He was proposing marriage in front of the entire court, making it impossible for anyone to claim I was merely his mistress. Your Majesty, the Queen Mother said, her voice strained. Surely such a momentous decision deserves careful consideration. I have considered it carefully, Aldrich interrupted, and my decision is final. As he led me from the throne room, my hand clasped firmly in his, I could feel the weight of every gaze boring into my back. In a single morning, I had gone from bastard servant to potential queen. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The announcement sent shockwaves through the castle that reverberated for days. No corner was immune to the gossip, speculation, and outright scandal. Servants whispered in corridors, nobles gathered in tight clusters, and the very air seemed to thrum with tension. I found myself under constant scrutiny, every gesture analysed for signs of unworthiness. The noble ladies who had previously ignored me now watched my every move with predatory intensity. Even walking to the library required navigating a gauntlet of stares and whispered commentary. Eleanor remained steadfastly loyal, but even she seemed shaken. Marriage, she said over tea, her voice barely above a whisper. Lydia, do you understand what this means? You could become a queen. The word felt impossible on my tongue. Queen, me, the bastard daughter who had grown up sleeping in servant quarters. The idea was so preposterous it might have been laughable if not for the deadly serious expressions on every face in the castle. I don't think I'm ready for this, I admitted, setting down my teacup with shaking hands. Ready or not? You're in the middle of it now, Eleanor said gently. The question is what you're going to do about it. Before I could answer, her maid appeared with news that Lord Chancellor Whitmore was requesting an audience with me. Eleanor and I exchanged worried glances. Such a request was highly unusual and potentially ominous. I found Lord Whitmore waiting in a small receiving room, his thin frame rigid with disapproval. He didn't invite me to sit, instead studying me with cold assessment. Lady Lydia, he began, his voice clipped. I trust you understand the gravity of your current situation. I understand that I am in a position I never sought and barely comprehend, I replied honestly. Indeed. Which is why I felt it necessary to speak with you privately. He began to pace. You seem intelligent, so I shall speak plainly. This marriage proposal is a disaster waiting to happen. His bluntness was startling. I beg your pardon? His Majesty is thinking with his heart rather than his head, and hearts make notoriously poor advisors in matters of state. A marriage between a king and a bastard of questionable lineage would create diplomatic chaos. I lifted my chin, drawing on reserves of dignity I wasn't sure I possessed. And yet it is his decision to make. Ah, but is it? Whitmore stopped pacing and fixed me with a piercing stare. Kings may seem all powerful, but they rule only with the consent of those they govern. Push too hard against established order, and that consent can be withdrawn. The threat was unmistakable. Are you suggesting rebellion, Lord Chancellor? I'm suggesting pragmatism. His Majesty is infatuated, but infatuation fades. When it does, he'll be left with a wife who brings nothing to the crown except scandal. Each word was designed to wound, and they found their mark. I had spent my entire life being reminded of my worthlessness. "What would you have me do?" I asked, hating the uncertainty in my voice. "Be wise. Be selfless. Withdraw from consideration. Convince His Majesty that you cannot accept his proposal. Save him from a decision he'll regret." I stared at him, understanding finally that this wasn't just political maneuvering, it was warfare. The Queen Mother and her allies were using every weapon to remove me from Aldrich's side, including the cruelest weapon of all, the truth about my inadequacies. "And if I refuse?" His smile was thin and cold. "Then you'll discover just how unpleasant life can become for someone who lacks protection of legitimate birth. Accidents happen, Lady Lydia. Reputations can be destroyed with a whisper. Young women have been known to simply disappear when they become inconvenient." The threat was clear. I felt cold creep up my spine, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "I see. Thank you for your counsel, Lord Chancellor." After he left, I sat alone, my mind reeling. Every word he'd spoken contained enough truth to cut deep. I was nobody, brought nothing to a marriage except complications. But as I sat there, drowning in doubt, I remembered something else. The way Aldrich had looked at me when he announced his intention to marry me. There had been no hesitation in his grey eyes, no calculation, only certainty and possession, and something that looked remarkably like love. That evening, I sought him out in his private study. I found him bent over diplomatic correspondence, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he worked by candlelight. When he looked up and saw me, his entire expression softened. "Lydia, I was hoping you'd come." "I need to tell you something," I said. "Lord Chancellor Whitmore visited me today." Aldrich's expression darkened immediately. "Did he? How illuminating. What pearls of wisdom did he share?" I told him everything, the threats, the political warnings, the suggestion that I withdraw. As I spoke, I watched Aldrich's face grow progressively more thunderous. "That bastard," he said quietly. "He dares to threaten you? To suggest that I don't know my own mind? He's not wrong about the political complications," I said carefully. "Marrying me would create problems." "Stop." He rose and crossed to me, taking my face in his hands. "Don't you dare repeat their poison to me. I know exactly what I'm doing and why." "But what if—" "No." His thumbs traced my cheekbones with devastating gentleness. "I have spent 32 years making decisions based on what others expected. Not this time. This time, I choose what I want. Consequences be damned. And what do you want?" "You," he said simply. "I want you beside me, with me, mine in every way that matters. I want to wake up to your face every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build something real with someone who sees me rather than my crown." His words were everything I had dreamed of, but never dared hope for. But doubt still gnawed at me. "I'm not noble-born. I bring no allies, no dowry." "You bring yourself," he interrupted. "Your strength, your intelligence, your capacity to see through all the pretense. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" When he kissed me this time, it was with desperation that spoke of fear. Fear that I might listen to his enemies and disappear. I kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all my own fears and hopes and impossible love into the connection between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Promise me," he whispered. "Promise me you won't let them convince you to leave." "I promise," I whispered back, and meant it with every fibre of my being. But even as I gave him my word, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lord Whitmore's threats had been more than empty posturing. The game we were playing had stakes higher than either of us fully understood, and I was beginning to suspect that someone was going to pay a terrible price for Aldrich's choice to love a bastard. The attack came 3 days later, swift and vicious as a snake strike. I was walking through the castle gardens in early morning, enjoying a rare moment of solitude. The roses were still heavy with dew, and the air carried the clean scent of rain. For just a few precious minutes, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I might wake up to such peaceful mornings as Aldrich's queen. The illusion shattered when Lady Catherine Mortimer appeared from behind a hedge, flanked by 2 young men I recognized as minor nobles. Their expressions were cold and predatory. "Well, well," Lady Catherine said, her voice honey-sweet with malice. "If it isn't our future queen, taking her morning constitutional like a proper lady. I straightened my spine and attempted confidence I didn't feel. "Lady Catherine, gentlemen, good morning." "Is it?" one of the young men asked with a nasty smile. "I suppose everything must seem good when you've managed to bewitch a king into forgetting his duty." "I have bewitched no one," I replied firmly. "His Majesty makes his own decisions, does he?" Lady Catherine stepped closer, and I caught the sharp scent of wine despite the early hour. "Or has he been led astray by a clever little bastard who knows exactly which strings to pull?" The word hit like a physical slap, but before I could respond, the second young man moved to block my path back toward the castle. "We thought you might benefit from some education about your proper place," he said conversationally. Fear began to claw at my throat, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Stand aside. I wish to return to the castle." "Oh, but we're not finished with our lesson yet," Lady Catherine said. She produced a small vial from her reticule, uncorking it to release a smell that made my stomach turn. "Do you know what this is, dear Lydia?" I didn't answer, but recognition was dawning with horrible clarity. The acrid smell. The way she held the vial like a weapon, it was some kind of acid. "Just a little something to help you remember your place," she continued, advancing slowly. "A small mark to remind His Majesty that some women are born to be discarded." I turned to run, but the two young men moved to flank me, cutting off escape routes. Panic flooded my system as I realized they intended to disfigure me. "Please," I said, hating the desperation in my voice. "Whatever grievance you have..." "Without what?" "Without teaching you the consequences of reaching above your station." Lady Catherine's mask of civility had slipped completely. "You think you can steal what belongs to noble blood?" She raised the vial and I saw my own destruction reflected in its deadly contents. But before she could throw it, a voice cut through the morning air. "Step away from her! Now!" We all turned to see Aldrich striding through the garden, his face a mask of absolute fury. Behind him came Sir Marcus and two other guards, their hands already on their sword hilts. Lady Catherine's face went white. "Your Majesty, You were merely threatening the woman I intend to marry with permanent disfigurement," Aldrich said, his voice deadly quiet. "Did you think I wouldn't hear about your little plan?" The vial slipped from Lady Catherine's nerveless fingers, shattering on the gravel and releasing its caustic contents. Where it touched the ground, grass immediately began to wither and blacken. I stared at the spreading damage and felt sick. That could have been my face. "Arrest them," Aldrich commanded. All three of them. "Attempted assault on a member of the royal court." "Your Majesty, please," one of the young men stammered. "We meant no real harm." "You were carrying acid with the intention of throwing it at Lady Lydia's face," Aldrich said with lethal calm. I heard every word from the hedge there. As guards moved to arrest the conspirators, Aldrich crossed to where I stood frozen in shock. His hands were gentle as they framed my face, checking for injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. The reality of how close I had come to disaster was only beginning to sink in. "Take them to the dungeons," Aldrich told Sir Marcus. "I'll decide their fate after I've ensured Lady Lydia's safety." As we walked back toward the castle, his arm around my waist in a gesture both protective and possessive, I finally found my voice. "You knew," I said. "You knew they were planning this." "Sir Marcus has been monitoring threats against you since the day I announced my intentions," he replied grimly. "It seems some people mistake my tolerance for weakness. What will happen to them?" His jaw tightened. "That depends on how merciful I'm feeling when my anger cools. Attempted disfigurement of a royal consort is treason in most kingdoms." The word treason sent a chill through me. I had no love for Lady Catherine, but the idea that people might die because of their hatred for me was overwhelming. "Aldrich," I said carefully. "Perhaps." "No." His tone brooked no argument. "Don't ask me to show mercy to people who would have destroyed your face out of spite. Some lines cannot be crossed without consequences." We had reached my chambers, but instead of leaving me there, he followed me inside and closed the door firmly. When he turned to face me, the royal composure had cracked, revealing fear and fury beneath. I could have lost you, he said hoarsely, if I had been even 5 minutes later. But you weren't, I said, crossing to him and placing my hands on his chest. You saved me. This time. His hands came up to cover mine, gripping them tightly. But they'll try again, Lydia. Different people, different methods, but they'll try again. The Queen Mother won't stop until either you're gone or I am. The truth settled over me like a weight. This morning's attack hadn't been desperate jealousy. It had been a calculated strike to remove me from the game entirely. What are we going to do? I whispered. He pulled me into his arms, holding me close enough that I could feel his heartbeat. We're going to accelerate our timeline, he said firmly. I had planned to court you properly to give you time to adjust, but it's clear that waiting only gives our enemies more opportunities. I pulled back to look at him. What are you saying? I'm saying we get married soon, within the week, if arrangements can be made. His grey eyes were intense with determination. Once you're my wife, my queen, attacking you becomes not just treason but an act of war. The political calculus changes completely. Marriage within the week. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Are you sure? I asked. There's no going back from this. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The question is whether you're ready to take such a leap of faith. I thought about the acid eating through garden soil, about the hatred in Lady Catherine's eyes, about all the forces arrayed against us. Then I thought about the way Aldrich looked at me as if I were the answer to prayers he'd never dared voice. Yes, I said simply. I'm ready, when he kissed me this time. It tasted like promise and victory and the beginning of a war we were determined to win together. But even as I melted into his embrace, I couldn't shake the feeling that our enemies had just begun to show their true hand. The announcement that King Aldrich and I would marry within 5 days sent the castle into a frenzy of activity and controversy that bordered on chaos. Seamstresses worked around the clock to create a wedding gown worthy of a queen. The kitchens operated in organized pandemonium to prepare for a feast hosting nobility from across the continent. And through it all, the undercurrent of political tension grew thicker with each passing hour. The Queen Mother's response was swift and merciless. She declared that such haste was indecent, that proper protocols required months of preparation. When Aldrich dismissed her objections, she began what could only be described as a campaign of sabotage. Guest lists mysteriously disappeared. Floral arrangements arrived wilted. The cathedral scheduled for the ceremony suddenly developed structural concerns. Each obstacle was designed to delay or diminish the wedding's grandeur, sending a clear message about the Queen Mother's opinion of the match. But for every challenge she created, Aldrich met it with unwavering determination. When the cathedral became unavailable, he arranged for the ceremony in the castle's great hall, declaring that the grandest cathedral was wherever his bride stood. When noble families sent regrets, he invited merchants and guild leaders instead, filling the guest list with people who understood the value of rising above birth circumstances. Eleanor became my anchor during those chaotic days, helping me navigate endless decisions about flowers, music, and ceremonial protocols. On the morning before the wedding, she found me staring at the magnificent gown that hung like a ghost of my impending future. Having second thoughts? She asked gently. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. Eleanor, what if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to be a queen? She sat beside me, taking my hand. Do you want to know a secret? No one is strong enough to be a queen when they start. It's something you become, not something you're born as. But you've seen real queens. You know what they're like. I've seen women who were given crowns by accident of birth and women who earned them through circumstance. You, my dear, are earning yours. That makes you more qualified than half the queens in history. Her words helped steady my nerves, but they couldn't quiet the deeper fear that gnawed at me. Tomorrow, I would become the most powerful woman in the kingdom. The responsibility felt crushing. That evening, Aldrich came to my chambers for what he called our last conversation as unmarried people. He looked magnificent in formal clothes, every inch the powerful king who commanded armies. But when he smiled at me, I saw the man beneath the crown. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked, settling into the chair across from mine. As ready as someone can be for a complete transformation of their existence, I said with a nervous laugh. He leaned forward, his expression growing serious. I need to tell you something. This morning, I received word from the church hierarchy. They're concerned about the spiritual implications of our marriage. My heart sank. What kind of concerns? They question whether the union can be blessed given your irregular birth circumstances. Some bishops believe that bastard blood cannot be sanctified for royal marriage. The words hit like physical blows. Even the church found me unworthy. What does that mean for tomorrow? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. It means we'll have a civil ceremony performed by the court chaplain rather than a full religious service. The marriage will be legal and binding but not blessed by the church hierarchy. I felt something inside me crumble. A wedding without religious blessing felt somehow illegitimate. I'm sorry, Aldrich said softly. I know this isn't what you dreamed of. I never dreamed of any of this, I replied honestly. Bastard daughters don't dream of royal weddings. We dream of survival and maybe, if we're very lucky, acceptance. He rose and crossed to kneel beside my chair, taking my hands. Listen to me, he said, his voice intense with conviction. I don't need the church's blessing to know that what we have is sacred. I don't need ancient protocols to know that you are worthy of every honor I can give you. Tomorrow, when you become my wife, you become the most important person in my world. That's not politics or strategy, that's truth. His words wrapped around me like armor, strengthening my resolve. What about the political consequences of defying the church? Let me worry about politics. Your job is to walk down that aisle tomorrow and promise to stand beside me no matter what storms we face. And if those storms destroy us? He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with tender precision. Then we'll face destruction together. But I don't think it will come to that. I think we're stronger than they imagine. The morning of the wedding dawned grey and misty, as if the weather itself were reflecting the uncertainty that hung over the proceedings. But as I stood before the mirror while Eleanor and 3 ladies' maids helped me into my gown, I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. The dress was a masterpiece of silk and pearls, designed to convey both elegance and strength. The bodice fit like a second skin, while the skirts flowed behind me in waves of ivory fabric that caught the light like captured moonbeams. A delicate tiara would hold my veil in place. You look like a queen, Eleanor said softly, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. I feel like I'm wearing a costume, I admitted, but there was less uncertainty in my voice than there had been the day before. All queens wear costumes, darling. The trick is wearing them with conviction. As we made final preparations, a commotion in the courtyard drew our attention to the windows. Looking down, we could see a crowd gathering, not just wedding guests, but common people from the surrounding village. They had come to witness the ceremony, to see the bastard girl become a queen. They're here for you, Eleanor said with wonder. Look at them, Lydia, they see hope in your story. She was right. The faces upturned toward my window weren't filled with resentment. They were filled with something that looked remarkably like inspiration. To them, I represented the possibility that birth circumstances didn't have to determine destiny. As church bells began to toll the hour, I took one last look at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was stronger than the girl who had fallen to her knees in humiliation just weeks ago. She was ready to claim her place beside the man she loved. Consequences be damned. It's time, Eleanor said gently. I nodded, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin. Then let's go make me a queen. The great hall had been transformed into a vision of ivory and gold, with hundreds of candles casting warm light over the assembled guests. As I walked down the aisle on the arm of Eleanor's father, the only noble willing to give me away, I saw a sea of faces watching my progress. Some smiled, some frowned, but all recognized that they were witnessing history in the making. And at the end of that long aisle stood Aldrich, magnificent in royal blue and gold, his grey eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. When he smiled, I felt my heart swell with love and certainty. Whatever storms awaited us, we would weather them as husband and wife, king and queen, partners in the dangerous game of love and power. But as the ceremony began and I heard the court chaplain's voice asking if anyone objected to our union, I couldn't shake the feeling that our victory was about to be challenged in ways we hadn't anticipated. The game, it seemed, was far from over. The objection came not from the assembled guests, but from an unexpected source that turned my blood to ice. I object to this union on the grounds of prior commitment and church law. The voice belonged to Archbishop Cornelius, the highest-ranking church official in the kingdom, who stepped forward from the shadows near the Great Hall's entrance. His appearance at what was meant to be a civil ceremony sent murmurs of shock rippling through the assembled guests. Aldrich's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "Your Grace, this is a civil ceremony. Church approval was not sought nor required." "Ah, but it is required when one of the parties has already been promised to God," the Archbishop replied smoothly, producing a scroll from his robes with theatrical precision. "I hold here a document signed by Sir Edmund Blackwood 20 years ago, committing his illegitimate daughter to the church as recompense for his sins." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the full implications sank in. If such a document existed, then I was legally promised to the church as a nun. Any marriage I attempted would be invalid. "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I spoke, memories began surfacing, fragments of conversations I had overheard as a child, mentions of arrangements that I had never fully understood. "I'm afraid it's quite possible." "My child," the Archbishop said with false sympathy. "Your father was consumed with guilt over his moral transgressions. Promising his bastard daughter to God's service was his way of making amends." Aldrich stepped forward, his hand moving protectively to my back. "Show me this document." The Archbishop unrolled the scroll with ceremony, revealing what appeared to be an official church contract bearing my father's seal and signature. The writing was faded but legible, and my heart sank as I recognized my father's, handwriting in the binding clauses that promised his illegitimate daughter Lydia to the service of God upon reaching her 18th birthday. "Even if this document is genuine," Aldrich said, his voice deadly quiet, "it was made without the girl's consent. She has never taken vows, never entered a convent. The contract is void." "Not according to church law," the Archbishop replied smugly. "A father has the right to dedicate his children to God's service. The girl's personal wishes are irrelevant." I found my voice, though it shook with emotion. "I was never told of any such arrangement. I've lived my entire life in this castle, not in church service." "A regrettable oversight," the Archbishop acknowledged, "but one that can be corrected. The church is prepared to be lenient. You may take your vows immediately." The trap was elegant and devastating. By producing this document at the last possible moment, the church had found a way to stop my marriage without directly challenging royal authority. They weren't forbidding Aldrich to marry me. They were claiming I wasn't free to marry anyone. "This is absurd," Eleanor called out from the audience. "If such a document existed, why was it not presented earlier? Why wait until the wedding ceremony itself?" "The church does not answer to your timeline, Lady Eleanor," the Archbishop replied coldly. But I could see the political calculation beneath his pious words. The timing was deliberate, designed for maximum impact and humiliation. The Queen Mother's influence was written all over this maneuver. Aldrich's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Your Grace, I find it remarkable that such an important document remained hidden for so long, almost as if it had been recently discovered. Are you questioning the integrity of church records, Your Majesty?" "I'm questioning the timing of their presentation, and I'm questioning whether this document is genuine or a convenient fabrication designed to serve political purposes." The accusations sent shockwaves through the assembly. Questioning the church's honesty was dangerous ground, even for a king. But as I stood there in my wedding gown, feeling victory slip away just as I had grasped it, something inside me rebelled against the injustice of it all. I had spent my entire life accepting other people's decisions about my fate. No more. "Your Grace," I said, stepping forward so that my voice carried clearly through the hall. "You claim this document binds me to church service. Very well. I challenge its validity on the grounds that it violates church law itself." The Archbishop's eyes narrowed. "What church law?" The law that states no person may be bound to religious service without their own consent or knowledge. The law that requires proper notification and preparation for those entering God's service. The law that forbids the use of religious commitment as a political weapon. I had no idea if such laws actually existed, but I spoke with the confidence of someone who had spent years listening to theological debates from hidden corners. The Archbishop's slight hesitation told me I had hit something close to the mark. Furthermore, I continued, my voice growing stronger, I formally renounce any commitment made on my behalf without my knowledge or consent. If my father promised me to God, then I unpromise myself. My soul belongs to God by choice, not by contract. Gasps echoed through the assembly. What I was suggesting bordered on heresy, but it was also legally sound. The Church could not hold me to vows I had never taken. You cannot simply renounce, the Archbishop sputtered. I can and I do, I said firmly. I stand before God and all assembled here as a free woman, bound by no promise except those I make with my own voice and my own will. Aldrich's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of support and solidarity. When he spoke, his voice rang with royal authority. The lady has spoken for herself, as is her right under both church and secular law. Any document that attempts to bind her without her consent is void. The ceremony will continue. This is an outrage, the Archbishop protested. The Church will not recognize this union. Then the Church will find itself in opposition to the Crown, Aldrich replied calmly. I trust your Grace is prepared for the consequences of that position. The threat was unmistakable. Kings had challenged church authority before, and the results were rarely pleasant for anyone involved. But in this moment, Aldrich was willing to risk everything for the right to marry me. The Archbishop looked around the hall, perhaps hoping for support from the noble families in attendance. But the faces staring back at him were more interested in avoiding involvement than in supporting his cause. Political winds could shift quickly, and no one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of a conflict between Crown and Church. The Church will remember this defiance, he said finally, his voice thick with rage. I'm sure it will, Aldrich replied, just as I will remember those who stood with me and those who stood against me on this day. As the Archbishop swept from the hall in a rustle of robes and wounded dignity, I felt a mixture of triumph and terror. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. By defying the Church so publicly, we had created enemies with power that transcended national boundaries. But when the court chaplain resumed the ceremony, his voice shaking slightly with the magnitude of what he was witnessing, I pushed aside thoughts of future consequences. This moment, standing beside the man I loved, speaking vows of commitment and partnership, was worth whatever price we might have to pay. Do you, Aldrich, take Lydia to be your wife to have and to hold, in kingdoms prosperous and kingdoms threatened, for as long as you both shall reign? I do, he said, his grey eyes never leaving mine. Do you? Lydia, take Aldrich to be your husband, to stand beside him in times of peace and times of war, to share the burden of the crown and the weight of royal responsibility. I thought of everything that had led to this moment, the humiliation, the challenges, the threats, the impossible love that had transformed my life beyond recognition. When I spoke, my voice was clear and strong. I do. The chaplain's words pronouncing us husband and wife were nearly drowned out by the cheers that erupted from the assembled guests. When Aldrich kissed me, sealing our union before God and witnesses, I tasted forever on his lips. But even as we turned to face our future as king and queen, husband and wife, I could see storm clouds gathering. The Queen Mother's face was a mask of cold fury. Several noble families were already whispering among themselves, and somewhere beyond the castle walls, the Archbishop was likely composing letters that would carry news of our defiance to every corner of the Christian world. We had won our right to love each other, but the cost of that victory was only beginning to be calculated. As we walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, crowned heads both literally and figuratively, I caught sight of the crowd of common people still gathered in the courtyard. Their faces were bright with joy and hope, seeing in our story proof that destiny could be changed, that love could triumph over circumstance, for them, and for us, and for the future we would build together, whatever the cost. The battle had been worth fighting, but the war, I knew, was just beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, as I sat in the royal gardens watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on how much had changed since that moment when I fell to my knees in humiliation before Aldric's throne. The political consequences of our marriage had been swift and complex. The church had indeed carried through on its threats, creating diplomatic difficulties that required careful navigation. Several noble families had withdrawn their support, testing our alliances, but others had stepped forward, recognizing that the winds of change were blowing and choosing to ally themselves with the future rather than the past. Most surprisingly, our defiance had inspired similar movements in neighboring kingdoms. 3 other royal marriages had taken place between rulers and common-born spouses, each citing our example as precedent. The rigid caste system that had governed noble society for centuries was beginning to crack, and we had struck one of the first decisive blows. Eleanor had been right. Being a queen was something you became, not something you were born to. Every day brought new challenges that tested my strength, my wisdom, and my capacity to lead. But with Aldric beside me and the support of those who believed in our vision of a more just society, I was learning to wear the crown with conviction. As I sat there in the fading light, Aldric appeared from the direction of the castle, still dressed in formal court attire, but with his expression relaxed in a way reserved for our private moments. "Your Majesty," he said with exaggerated formality, bowing deeply. "I trust the evening finds you well?" "Quite well, Your Majesty," I replied, playing along with his humour. "And how was your day of ruling the known world?" "Exhausting as always, but worth it for moments like this." He settled beside me on the stone bench, his hand finding mine with easy familiarity. "Any regrets?" I asked, the question that still surfaced occasionally in quiet moments. "Only that it took so long for you to fall at my feet," he said with a grin. "If you had managed it sooner, we could have avoided months of political drama." I laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful garden. "I'll try to be more efficient with my dramatic collapses in the future." "See that you do. I have a reputation for swift, decisive action to maintain." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, we sat together in comfortable silence, king and queen, husband and wife, 2 people who had found in each other the strength to challenge the world and win. The bastard daughter had become a queen, the lonely king had found his match, and together we were writing a love story that would echo through history. I hope you've enjoyed this journey from humiliation to triumph, from bastard daughter to queen. If this story touched your heart, please like this content and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favourite moment? Which character resonated most with you? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Until next time, may your own love story be filled with the courage to choose your own destiny.